teaching students the history of Canada from an Indigenous perspective. For years, Indigenous educators and community leaders have worked to develop a curriculum for TDSB students, one that has now been introduced to classrooms across the city. But now some advocates are pushing for major reforms that would make Indigenous studies mandatory across the system.
In the past, the only history that was taught was when the settlers first arrived.
A history that dates back thousands of years, transformed into a curriculum encompassing all the events that took place in North America, missing from textbooks for far too long.
History didn't start in Canada in 1867. It was here a long time before.
In their curriculum, the TDSB has been focusing on two crucial areas of learning: language.
Etobicoke, Mimico, Mississauga, this is all Indigenous language, but a lot of people don't really know what the words mean and what language they come from.
And history, with residential schools a major piece.
There was a very shameful period in Canadian history.
While school boards are responsible for the material and resources that students see in their classes, Ontario's Ministry of Education developed the curriculum, and one author says the system will continue to fail students if the government doesn't take Indigenous education a step further.
I'd like to see Indigenous literature taught in high schools, and not just Indigenous literature, but the true history of this country.
Stemming from a recommendation by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the curriculum was revised in 2018 to specifically direct that Indigenous history and the impacts of colonialism be taught in secondary schools, but the courses aren't mandatory.
They made some of those curriculum changes a choice, not mandatory. These are changes that had been worked on for years and years by elders, by Indigenous educators.
We asked Ontario's Ministry of Education if they are reconsidering making these courses compulsory. In a statement, they tell us in part, our government has introduced transformational changes in our education system with a focus on removing systemic barriers that hold students back, for instance, eliminating streaming into applied and academic courses and providing teachers with additional anti-racism training. They add the Ontario curriculum does include some mandatory learning related to Indigenous content, and while courses in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit studies are not compulsory, credits earned through these courses may be used to fulfill compulsory requirements for a secondary school diploma. For City News, I'm Tina Yazdani.